Why hello there my lovely viewers, it is me, Rycam Productions, and in today's video, this will be like a behind the scenes slash making of video of the music video that I made recently called Fire for the Gus Glynn band. And yeah, to say that I am immensely proud of this animation is an understatement. So basically how this animation came to be was I contacted the client over email and he said, yeah, so can you do this music video, this like animated music video, because they actually liked my work. Can you do this like animated music video for us that's called Fire? So it's like a Wild West tale where the whole synopsis was it's like a Wild West tale where this young boy gets sent to like a pit of monsters as like a punishment for the crime he committed. And it has a bunch of like Lovecraftian creatures in it, and like he fights all of them and then transforms into this ghostly preacher man to like enact revenge on the town. And it's also 6 minutes long as well, and I was like, bro, what?
You gotta be fucking kidding me!
I did ask if they had a much shorter kind of song that I could like make an animation for, like a 3-minute long one or a 3.5-minute long one, because my previous longest one I ever did was my honours project, The Uniqueness of the Animal Kingdom, the one I did for university. That was like 2.5 minutes, and they said that we could, but we think that this one is the only like song that they had that actually told a story and actually like conveyed a story and thought it would be the most interesting visually for me to animate. So I was like, alright, I'll see what I can do. So first of all, the kind of second half of the animation, like after he turns into Preacher Man, was kind of not really entirely made up by me. I was like, oh, how about he just goes, he like resurrects like a horse's corpse and then rides the horse corpse to like the town and kills the two guys. But the client was like, I think it would be better if he just like walked to the town and then set the town ablaze. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea, and I don't have to animate a horse as well. Although I would have loved to like do the animation where he resurrects the horse's corpse and it's all like disheveled with like flesh ripping off and flies everywhere. That would have been great. I'm kind of familiar with like the Wild West genre. I've not really watched a huge amount of Wild West stuff, so it's like there's like the classic like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. There's Red Dead Redemption, which I haven't played. There's like those two Quentin Tarantino movies, you know, Django Unchained and Hateful Eight, which I have seen loads of times and they're great. Then there's also stuff like Blood Meridian, which I know is quite popular and everything else. So since I'm quite unfamiliar with that, I just basically went on Pinterest and I googled cowboy. I must have gotten like 50 images of cowboys from like graphic novels and games and everything, and compiled all that stuff into like mood boards as well. So there was the cowboy stuff, there was the deserts, there was like, I kind of included like as much Wild West iconography as I could. So you know, things like Stetsons, revolvers, 6-shooters, canyons, deserts, cacti. No horses were in the animation though, but you know, like the boots with the spikes in them, which are designed to make horses, you know, go fast. You know, vultures, like Mexican standoffs, sheriff's badges, you know, all that shit. Just all of that Wild West iconography. Just have as much as possible to get the point across that this is set in the Wild West. I also made like separate mood boards for like the coloration and the aesthetics and the environments for the animation, since most of the animation is just, most of the backgrounds in the animation are just canyons with deserts and rocks and all that stuff. All the stuff in the middle of it, which is like the canyon sequence, there's not really any backgrounds. Like the backgrounds are just a single color, because in that sequence he's like in a dark chasm that you're not supposed to see the background of. And with the backgrounds in the second half, it's like basically the same but with a nighttime color scheme and coloration with constellations and stars and the full moon. The backgrounds never really got intense until the final like minute or so when you get to the Wild West town, and I absolutely hate doing backgrounds. With that background, I'd say that this background on the screen was probably the background I spent the most time on, because I do quite simplified backgrounds. For that background I used like a perspective grid, and I'm not really good with buildings either, so, but I think I got it down just well. Now the client said that all the creatures in the pit, like in the middle of the animation where like he shoots all of them and kills all of them and he gets overwhelmed by the creatures, He said that he wanted them to have a more lizardy kind of appearance, very Lovecraftian, because he said one of the main like USPs is like a western mixed with like Lovecraftian aesthetics. Looking back, I don't really think I got the Lovecraftian vibe down. Like, all I really know about H.P. Lovecraft's work is, of course, there's Cthulhu, who's like the most popular creation of his, and it's all about tentacles and like weird sea monsters and everything. There's loads of eyes and tentacles, just tentacles in general. So I kind of looked at some H.P. Lovecraft like images and illustrations on Pinterest, and I kind of did blatantly copy some of those monsters that I saw in the animation. I tried to have as much diversity with the creatures as possible, and I think I got it done well. Maybe I could have like gone with that more Lovecraftian vibe more with the creatures, but oh well. It's not a huge part of the animation though, because the part where he fights the creatures and then gets sucked into like the hellish like fire environment by the king creature is only like a small fragment of the animation. But once all the mood boards were gathered, I basically just did a bunch of like concept sketches and like environmental like thumbnails to send to the client as well. Again, like there's only like 3 human characters, 4 if you technically want to include the preacher man when he transforms. I was just like experimenting at first, doing a bunch of doodles of the environments, the creatures in the pit, like the sheriff characters, like just constantly studying these mood boards as well. I used like very tiny little doodles as well, and the client was kind of fine with them. Admittedly, I did kind of wing a lot of the designs in the production phase, like when I actually started animating them, but this kind of got me a good like general vibe of how it would look. So next up for the animation came the storyboarding phase. So again, what I usually do for my animations, for the more longer animations, I get like a storyboard template and I just like doodle in them. Again, storyboards don't have to be super duper detailed, they just show the process of what's going on in the scene. So this is where the 6-minute long runtime kind of got to me. Like the original script wasn't really that chock full of detail, and there is this long 30-second instrumental part of the song, like towards the 4-minute long mark, that, oh boy, I had to really stress with what to do with that one. So for the storyboarding, I just doodled all the scenes. Most of the animation is accurate to the storyboards, the original storyboards, but I think there was quite a lot, like the scene where he's in the cave and he transforms into the preacher man was entirely redone. I had to entirely re-storyboard that part to make it more, because the original storyboards, it wasn't very obvious that the main character transformed into the preacher man, and like that part kind of looked a bit boring, so I had to completely redo those storyboards. I only redid those storyboards when I got to animating that part, because I wanted that part to look more visually interesting and weird and wacky, and to make it more obvious that he transformed. These were all compiled into an animatic, and thankfully there is no sound effects that I had together for the animation, because I despise getting sound effects. So like, I was thinking about other animated music videos, like there is Land of Confusion by Disturbed, there's all those Gorillaz songs, even though I'm not a big Gorillaz fan. There's A Little Piece of Heaven by Avenged Sevenfold, that's a great animated music video. I had to like look at all those and think, there are no sound effects in these animated music videos, it's just the songs. So thankfully I just had to use the song as audio for the video, so I can kind of like sync up the animatic and like the storyboards with what happens and the story beats in the song. So when it got to the actual animation part, I had to send off the animator to the client. He was fine. I had to think about how the fuck was I supposed to animate this whole 6 minutes now. So that's when we got into the production phase, and the animatic did help a huge amount, but there was some things that I kind of still winged though. So, for the actual animation part of this animation, which took up the most amount of time of the project, which as you can tell is pretty obvious, I basically separated the whole music video into 5 parts, and got paid by each of those parts. So part 1 is basically everything from him getting taken up to the cliff and seeing all the creatures in the cliff and being handed the gun. Part 2 is basically him going into the chasm and killing all the Lovecraftian creatures and encountering the king creature. Part 3 is when he gets yoinked into the cave and all that trippy sequence with the live action images and him transforming into the Preacher Man happens. Part 4 is the Preacher Man getting out of the chasm and then walking to the town and getting all the weapons as well. And part 5 is everything until the end, where he gets to the town, kills the 2 cowboys and sets the town ablaze. And that's basically how I structured it. The main animation software I use is Krita, so all the hand-drawn animation was done in that. And basically I just went shot by shot. Some shots were extremely easy and took me like a whole day or so, or like 3 hours to do. Other shots were also extremely difficult as well. I would say the most difficult shot to hand animate was this part right here, where he like shoots the creature, swings around, shoots the other creature, and then stabs the other creature. That was very difficult to do. That was the hardest shot in the whole animation to hand animate anyway. So to find out how long each shot would have taken me to do, I basically just went into Premiere and like spliced all the animatics down by shot. Some shots were like as short as like a second and a half. Other shots went up to like 15 seconds or so. I think the longest shots were like, of course, the parts were like they're walking across the desert. For those shots I used After Effects, where I made the background, separated them into different layers, and did like a parallax scrolling effect where the foreground scrolls a lot quicker than the fore. I would name all the shots in the animation like verse 1, shot 3, verse 5, shot 12, and so on and so forth like that. The actual hand-drawn animated parts would start with like the rough sketches where I look at reference, and it's the longest part of that animation part where I just like faintly like sketch in blue, sometimes red, the characters doing the actions, and include all the 12 principles of animation, such as overlapping actions, squash and stretch, exaggeration, timing and spacing, appeal, and all that stuff. So actually I'd say that's probably joint longest with like the lines and like the clean animations. So it's like I basically lower the opacity on the sketches and like go in fine line over the sketches to make it look more clean. The colouring is the easiest of the 3 stages of the hand-drawn animation. Basically, I would just like come up with like a colour scheme for the characters, and I would just run with it for the rest of the animation, like the ginger-haired character at the beginning, the sheriff, the guy with the hands on the rifle, the preacher man, the creatures, all that stuff. I would basically just like come up with a colour scheme and use the fill tool to fill in the lines, and if they went over into another shot, like this shot, like shot 8 and shot 9 have the preacher man doing stuff, I would just like copy and paste from that as well. Shading I never really bothered with unless there's like a prominent light source in the shot, like the scene, this shot right here where the fire illuminates the character and like there's obviously a strong light source in the character. I think that's the only time I ever actually bothered doing shading on a shot. Now, when you're an animator, you of course need to understand how things move, and that's where reference comes into play. Now, gathering reference in how characters move, like how a character would thrust his arm into the air, shoot a gun, blink, like how the arms would affect the shoulder movement, which affects the chest movement, the eyes would naturally turn with the movement of the head and everything. So, for some shots where it's like a character crying, if the character is crying, or if the character is like throwing a punch, or the character is like panting, I would obviously go on Pinterest or look up YouTube videos about like real life figures or like animated examples of the characters like panting heavily or like looking shocked or shooting the gun. But there were some exceptions where there was quite a lot of it where I recorded my own reference in my room on my webcam, and that was pretty fun to do. I got pretty creative with some of the references that I got, like for when he comes out of the blood ocean I used like a blanket, and for like the close-up shot where he stabs the character, I literally got a knife from my kitchen and just plunged my like hands down to pretend I'm stabbing someone multiple times. My brother actually has a proper like replica Wild West like 6-shooter gun, so of course I was going to use that for the scene where he shoots the character and when he like tucks the gun away and like spins the gun as well. Of course I was going to use that. Here in this reference, that's my mum handing me that gun that I pretended to use as like a Wild West shotgun. Yeah, that was pretty fun. I always find like live action animated reference pretty funny as well. Like, that must be so much fun to do. So basically, for each of the 5 parts, I went through all the phases of the 5 parts. So when I finished part 1, I moved on to part 2, etc, etc. And after the animation phase is when the post-production editing phase came in, and damn, there was a lot of post-production trickery in this animation. So of course, a lot of green screening was used, so I would overlay the characters using green screen on top of the background. Lots of screen shakes, lots of transitions that I would use, like crash zooms, lots of rumbling, overlapping the green screen on top of the background scrolling. Like, you know, for the scene at the beginning and the scene where the preacher man walks across the desert, that was like them being green screened on top of the moving backgrounds I did in After Effects as well. I kind of tried to like time it and slow it down, speed it up so it matches the speed of the background as well. So for those walking shots, that was like a 6-frame loop, so that will be looped repeatedly for the whole shot. So I basically copy and paste and then compile the whole thing together and green screen it on top of the background as well. There was lots of lens flares used in the first part of the animation to show like a beaming sun shining down on the characters. And the complete opposite for the shot where like the character is sleeping in the shack when he gets stabbed, or the part in the chasm where he's fighting all the creatures. I darkened that in post-production in Premiere as well, because the original one was kind of way too bright, I thought, so I just darkened it in post-production to give the sense that, oh, he's obviously in this very dark chasm. Obviously not pitch black, because then the audience wouldn't be able to see anything, but to give the sense that he's in a dark place, you know. And for example, for the shot where the preacher man is like walking like across the screen or like towards the camera, I basically animated him like walking on the spot, exported the green screen, and then in Premiere I tweened it to like bob up and down so it looks like he's bobbing up and down whilst he walks, you know. Very high IQ stuff right there. I'm known for my attention to detail in my animations and my artwork, and this one is definitely no exception. Everyone loves like the vulture at the beginning that does a little core when it goes across the screen as well. It really adds to the atmosphere. And as well as stuff like, you know, because they're on like a gravelly, like sandy environment, the extreme close-up shot where like he digs his feet into the sand. I mean, it's not the sand and the grains like go around his feet as well, so it's like he's proper digging into the ground. You know, stuff like that, and that really adds a sense of realism. For the most part, the client was very happy with what I produced. We did kind of get into a bit of a, not really an argument, but like a bit of a disagreement on the long walking shot in the nighttime, where it's like a 35-second instrumental part where he walks across the desert, and that was again just a little walk cycle I repeated and the background parallaxed. I did say to him that if it's just this, the audience would probably find it boring though, because it is pretty much just 35 seconds of him walking across the desert, so that's quite boring to look at. So I came up with the idea of like, I was thinking, how do I make it more interesting? I can have like pop-ins of like animated like flashbacks, so when the boy was in the town when he was a boy and he was getting bullied and abused. Or I can have like constellation, star constellation in the sky and tell it. Then I landed on an idea of like thought bubbles of like flashbacks of when he was getting abused as a boy in the town, like a teen in the town, of him getting like, you know, I even wrote a notepad of horrible shit that happens to him. Like him literally getting tripped up and then his face planting in shit. Or him getting drowned or thrown into cacti. You know, a little bit of a background context as to how he ended up in the beginning of the animation where he's being guided up the hill, you know. These were actually inspired by, you know, the game Binding of Isaac. The loading screens in Binding of Isaac where Isaac's like dreaming and having all these nightmares of horrible shit that's happening to him. The client eventually said that it looks good, but I don't know, I think his version, if you actually look on his channel, doesn't have those flashbacks. He says that he thought they were like pretty silly and that it would take away from the tension and they looked a bit too silly for the tone of the animation, which I kind of agree, but I think that's better than just 35 seconds of him walking, and that's boring. Now, that was pretty much the only clash that the client and I had. So overall, that's how I made the Fire animated music video. Of course, the simple thing is, since it's 6 minutes, that 6 minutes is intimidating, you know? It takes so much time to make like 10 seconds of animation, you know, let alone 6 minutes. I know like the last 20 seconds is just a match cut from the moon to the band's logo and like some text added in for the credits, but still, it's impressive, you know. It's that classic breaking a huge project down into small chunks to make it more manageable and less intimidating kind of approach, which is a very smart way to do it. I started this project in early February. I believe the very beginning of February is when I had my first call with the client as well, and I was like, how on earth am I gonna do this? It's literally double the time of my honours project, which took me 9 months in my last year of university, but I've done it, and I'm super proud of myself. The deadline was July 15th, and this was the last shot that I actually worked on, this shot right here. I did most of the shots in order, but I kind of went out of order for some of them. As long as they're compiled in the correct chronological order, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I would really appreciate it. I would honestly monumentally appreciate it if you showed the music video some love and showed this video some love. And it was just a huge project, and I'm so glad to put it on my portfolio and my showreel as well. And now I can finally go back to making silly meme and fan art animations as well, of my own ideas. You know, I was going to start Five Nights at Limp Bizkit's until this basically took it over, so I can finally get on with Five Nights at Limp Bizkit's, which has been in development hell for fucking ages because of this project. So, yeah, well, thank you for watching this. Make sure to like and subscribe, and you'll get to see Fred Durst jump scare you eventually.